Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Today we're gonna discuss the work of the Asian Pacific regionalism as well as deal with the African regionalism integration. I give you a short overview here. We split the topics into two major themes, basically the Asia Pacific part, which I will deal, and then my colleague will talk about the regionalism in Africa. We will start like historically now with the Asian Pacific and regionalism. So let's start with the integration of the Asia Pacific regional process, basically, which started in 1989 with the APEC, which stands for Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. We had then the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s, which intensified kind of a integration process in the Southeast Asian countries, for which ASEAN stands for, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, who worked together because they were all basically in this financial crisis in trouble, basically together. And recently, now with the US-China trade tensions, global power competition, basically, we have basically a new integration process, which is more about the trade, basically, which is the RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Um, so about the APEC, it was founded in 89. It includes basically 21 countries, and it is an open, very soft regionalism, market-led integration. There's no real institution for that, like we see in the EU. There's no supranationalism or anything like that, right? It is also more focusing on market integration through trade liberalization, fostering economic policies, dialogues, and having common standards for certain products and trade requirements. Obviously, with a limited institutional capabilities, the integration process of this is very slow. It's very soft. It's not very forced by a big power, basically, but all on a table with where you have basically consensus required and just talking, basically. When we talk about the Asian, it is has a long history, basically starting in the late 60s and accelerated in the 90s, where we also had this more economic forced integration, which is the predecessor kind of, or like the blueprint of the European Union, basically, or European Economic Community at this time back in the days. And there we have like also the free flows of goods, services, investments, capital, skilled labor across those participating countries. And we have basically different agreements which make up the Asian cooperation framework, or this organization, basically, right? It has no supranational role like the EU, but it has kind of yeah, it's basically a table in where those member states meet and try to integrate more on the economic means, and also some strategic decision making, and cultural exchange is also part of this. And lastly, the RCEP was led by Asian countries and wanted to basically integrate other bigger nations like Japan, South Korea, China, Australia, and also into this landscape, and to create a stronger economic bloc, basically, because Southeast Asia basically are like rather poor countries. It emerged as a response to the US-led TPP, which was also like a big free trade agreement, what did not happen at the end. And then yeah, and so the focus was then China basically took over the idea and really strengthened it, and then it got into effect. Yeah, so it basically is has more power of economic integration of the markets, and integrates and leads to a better, basically a coherent economic bloc, and more free trade. Well, we have here a short table that we compare a little bit those different kind of forms of integration regionalism we have, with the more institutionalized one to more like agreements, the depth of integration. Also, you can have a look at this. We will not talk about extensively about this now in detail for time concerns. So when we go now to the conclusion, to the overall evaluation of these kind of processes we have seen in the last couple of decades, we can see that through the Asian and the RCEP, which is really focused on economic cooperation, and so the intra-regional trade has grown very much. Those countries, especially in the APEC, which is a little bit more for political dialogue and all that, has also provided some stable integration processes. And for that reason, we have stronger supply chain integrations, which means one country like Vietnam is doing this part, then puts it to the border to Thailand, which is then adding some value to that. And this is now way easier than it used to be before. Limitations is, of course, the supranational nature, which is lacking. That means the process has really like be slow. There's no like one authority which can like make decisions. Also, on paper, the integration looks greater than at the end it is because some implementation gets and some government is still appearing. And of course, with the different overlapping multiple regional agreements, we have here basically three. There is kind of a conflict, of course, and also makes it more complex at the end. When we look in the future, we see from a political point of view, ASEAN, the Asian framework is more is strong for the more like one voice basically and strategically for those Southeast Asian countries, which itself there is no real major player. But when we look at maybe RCEP or something like that, with those bigger players in play like Japan, South Korea, China, you see that there's a kind of a power struggle there. But at the end, without a supranational institution, you see that still all the players look at their domestic benefits. And so in order to progress for more integration and also take some costs, a lot of players, countries in these agreements don't want to go so far, right? And also look more for the global markets to integrate there. Yeah. With all those different agreements and institutions in play, the complexity overlap is a little bit different for structuring more integration, which is kind of a hindrance. At the end, as a final conclusion, as we have seen, of course, in the last 1-2 decades, with the South Asia Pacific region being like the center of gravity for geopolitical tensions with the US and China, and also some economic crisis we have seen in the 90s. This region has become more prominent in world politics and also in the manufacturing global supply chain business. And so this integration process, of course, has strengthened this too, right? It has built the base for this kind of stuff, for the progress for integrating into global markets. Because most of these countries, besides like China, Japan, and South Korea for the APEC, but for the RCEP, the other countries are very, very small players, right? Yeah. Right. So now Asian countries, through being integrated in this more globalized economy, through the RCEP and the AEC, have become a little bit more stronger as a voice and also more heard in the economic world order. Basically, they play a more important role. We will see how it will evolve with this kind of regionalism in Asia Pacific, especially with the tensions between China and the US. And how they will position themselves in the global world economic order. Okay, so now we talk about the historical context of the African regionalism.
Yeah, thank you. And after that, I will also talk about, now I will talk about the history, development, and current dynamics of the regionalism in Africa. We will explore how regional cooperation in Africa is shaped by Pan-African ideals and how it addresses challenges like conflict resolution and democratic governance. African regionalism is not only about economics, it's deeply rooted in political solidarity and post-colonial identity. And this is particularly the idea of Pan-Africanism. Over time, this has evolved into both continental efforts like the African Union and sub-regional organizations such as ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, and IGAD, which we'll talk about further in the presentation. This part of the presentation will also analyze the achievements of these organizations, their limitations, and the future perspectives. So here in the historical context of African regionalism, we have that regionalism in Africa began with the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, in 1963, which emphasized national sovereignty and non-intervention. However, this limited its ability to manage internal conflicts. Like in 2002, it was replaced by the African Union, or AU, which allowed for a more proactive stance in governance, peace, and development. This shift reflects African attempt to become both united and effective in addressing regional issues, not just internal issues. Can you turn? Yeah, perfect. There, the
Oh yeah, I already.
characteristics and achievements. It is that the AU brings together all African countries and promotes values like peace, democracy, and human rights. One of its key tools is the African peer review mechanism, which evaluates governance in member states. Importantly, the AU can intervene in cases of genocide or war crimes, a major shift from the old non-intervention principle that I mentioned before. It represents a move toward continental responsibility and accountability. Can you change to the next one? And now we are going to talk about the ECOWAS and SADC, which are conflict resolution and governance mechanisms. Subregional organizations have taken lead in conflict management. For example, the ECOWAS has intervened militarily in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Mali through the ECOMOG. Meanwhile, the SADC has taken action in Lesotho and Zimbabwe. Both are organizations that have gone beyond economic cooperation to enforce democratic norms, like suspending governments after coups. And these efforts show how African regionalism addresses both security and democracy and not just the economic part. Yeah. And then we have the institutional overlap and subregional dynamics. A major challenge is that African countries often belong to multiple organizations with overlapping mandates. This causes confusion, and weakness the effectiveness of the processes, and also causes that Africa has to stretch its resources. According to Naganon, one of the theories that we were analyzing, these institutional overlaps reduce coordination and make implementation of the politics a little bit harder, especially when organizations rely heavily on external funding. Then we have this comparison between yes, perfect, between the AU, the African Union, ECOWAS, and SADC. And here we have the chart, but like to make it a little brief, we have the AU is a continental organization and focuses on governance and security. The ECOWAS is strong on military and democratic intervention in West Africa. And the SADC learns toward economic programs, but also engages in security. However, this comparison, they all face resource constraints and political divisions that sometimes can make their goals harder to achieve. Yeah, then we have the achievements and limitations. Some major achievements include the development of shared democratic norms, successful peacekeeping missions, and increased regional ownership. However, the limitations, sorry, are equally important. We have weak enforcement, over reliance on international donors, and overlapping institutions, the ones that I mentioned before. This shows that while progress is visible, many challenges are also remaining to be solved. Then we have the future perspectives, and for the future, experts highlight some several priorities. The first is streamlining, sorry, regional mechanisms to avoid duplication, building financial autonomy to reduce reliance on external donors, enforcing shared democratic values more consistently, and improving coordination between continental and sub-regional actors. These steps could help African regionalism become more effective and sustainable at the same time. And so we have our conclusion. And in conclusion, in the African regionalism and integration, is that this process is historically significant and politically complex. It reflects the legacy of Pan-Africanism and the need for collective solutions to regional crises. While structures like the AU, ECOWAS, and SADC have achieved a lot, especially in promoting peace and democracy, institutional reform and political will are essential to meet Africa's integration goals that I mentioned before. So I think we have a lot to recognize to this Africa regionalism, but also we have a lot to learn about the challenges that they have left to resolve. Thank you. And these are our references of both parts of the presentation. And thank you very much.